My dear friends, we have the honor today of having a conversation with Dan Feferman. I want to go back a little bit in history. After the 6 Days War, there was a meeting in Khartoum. That's in Africa, I believe. And there were 3 no's. That was the result. The Arabs with Israel, no negotiations, no peace, no recognition. And apparently the 3 no's have been around since then onward, notwithstanding all the different wars that may have happened, the different diplomatic changes in the world. Those 3 no's are still there. As a matter of fact, many people thought, and this was common knowledge, that there'll never be peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians because the differences are too great. Whatever that may be, there were also some people who said that the entire world is going to explode sooner or later because the problem in the Middle East is not being solved. And unless you solve that, there'll never be peace in the entire world. But suddenly, something happened. Well, it started really with Egypt, then Jordan. Israel established peace with those 2 countries, even though it was, I don't know, a cold peace, something like that. It was a ceasefire, no war anymore, but basically no closeness between the 2 people, nothing like that. There was still tension between every country, but on the other hand, there was no war, which in itself is very good. For Israel especially, Israel can grow. But suddenly something else appeared. Something appeared that apparently had been in the works for many years before. Now they are called the Abraham Accords. And the Abraham Accords means that Israel has established relations, not only diplomatic relations. I think that is something between 2 governments, but there's more between the peoples. There is interchange and so on. And there is a group of young people that are led by this young man, well, young compared to me, Dan Feferman. He is the director of Sharaka, and I want to give him a great welcome. Please tell us, Dan, what is this Sharaka all about?
Thank you, Rabbi. It's so nice to be here. Sharaka means partnership in Arabic, and we're founded by young leaders, young entrepreneurs from Israel and from the Gulf region. After the signing of the Accords, so that the Accords would not remain solely on the governmental levels or maybe between senior business people in conferences, rather to give them cultural thickness, to allow the peoples of the countries to get to know each other and to promote the benefits of the Accords, be they on the governmental, on the security, on the business, on the economic, on the ecological, scientific levels, what have you, to all levels of society in the Abraham Accords countries and beyond around the Middle East. And so that's what we're trying to do. I have the good fortune I had the communications and global affairs aspect, and I'm fortunate to work alongside a group of fantastic people from the UAE, from Bahrain, from Morocco, and of course in Israel, and including people from other parts of the Arab world who live in the UAE. And together we've taken it upon ourselves, this mission to be sort of ambassadors for this new peace, for the Accords, and for warm relations on a people-to-people level between the peoples of these countries.
Well, I understand that there are now regular flights between Israel and these countries. And as a matter of fact, I understand that even though Saudi Arabia is formally not a member of the peace accords, Israeli airplanes fly over their airspace, which wasn't allowed before. So apparently things are changing in a very important way. I also understand that delegations of economic, of cultural, scientific are being exchanged between all these countries. And I think that is terrific. And I'm very happy. I remember the late president of Israel, Shimon Peres. He once said that Israel should be the locomotive. Actually, Israel is so far advanced, the other countries can take advantage if they latch onto Israel. Why is there antagonism? To the contrary, we can all progress together. But tell me, is the Arab-Palestinian problem going to be solved, or it doesn't matter anymore?
No, I think it matters and it has to be solved. But there are two realizations here that took place, and one was that the regional approach, led originally by the Arab leaders themselves, who saw it as maybe a boogeyman that they could use to distract from their own problems at home, rally the people around the flag of a cause, of the common enemy. That's dissipated over the years. I think the concept promoted in the region that held much of the region hostage to exactly the kind of cooperation that we can all benefit from if we work together, and that the other countries can enjoy Israel's technological and scientific prowess, was held hostage to this notion that nothing can move forward if the Palestinian issue is not solved. And in fact, this came to be entrenched in diplomatic speak around the world, that they didn't call it the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They called it the Middle Eastern conflict, or the Israeli-Arab conflict. Well, as you probably well know, and maybe many of your listeners, there are many conflicts around the Middle East. And that doesn't mean that Israel's ongoing conflict with the Palestinians does not need to be solved. It most certainly does. But I think there's also a growing realization that why should the UAE or Bahrain or Morocco or Sudan or other countries in the region, maybe Saudi Arabia one day, why should they limit their relationship with Israel because the Israelis and the Palestinians can't get their act together? And I said that on purpose because it doesn't matter who's to blame right now. The point is, it hasn't been solved, and having the region distance itself from Israel for so long hasn't helped in any way. Clearly, when there's so many other problems we need to be working together toward, we have climate change and environmental and water security and food security issues. We have common enemies. We have the common enemy of Iran and its version of radical militant Islam, and also ISIS and Muslim Brotherhood and its version of radical militant Islam. And these are all forces of extremism in the region at a time when it's clear the US has really no interest in getting militarily involved in other parts of the world, and recognizing all that Israel has to offer. So you had all of these push and pull factors, and it took a brave step, let's call it a visionary step, by the UAE leadership to say, we're not going to wait around for the Palestinians anymore. That said, I don't think there's any intention, certainly not on the side of the Arab countries, to ignore or forget the Palestinian issue. But now perhaps, and as they've said in their own words, they can now have a seat at the diplomatic table. And if Israel and the Palestinians so choose, they can also play a positive role, having developed trust, credibility, and political capital with both sides rather than with just one side.
Well, one thing is for sure, that the Palestinian-Israeli issue is no longer on the front burner. It's been displaced to another. And I'm glad that you mentioned something. There is a tremendous confrontation between Sunnis and Shiites in the Arab world. And one cannot put that aside as a factor for the Abraham Accords, because Iran is viewed by Saudi Arabia, by Bahrain, by the United Emirates as really the most dangerous enemy nowadays. And Israel would be a tremendous ally, not only because of its economic, because of its military strength. Hashem oz le'amo yiten. God has to give strength to the Jewish people, and then we will have peace. If you're strong, you will have peace. So they wouldn't mind having Israel, of course, on their side. Now, I want to expand our prism a little bit. We're right now in the midst of the Ukraine war, whatever you have it. Russia is trying to dominate what is right now an independent country, even though we know that for many, many years it was part of the Soviet Union. And for us Jewish people, and for Israel, I can imagine, one can sense that on the one hand, we are against any kind of war. If Russia is killing civilians, we're totally against that. But on the other hand, we can't forget the history of the Jewish people and the Ukrainians, because according to survivors that are still around of the Second World War, the most cruel guards at the concentration camps were Ukrainians. You know, in the 20th century, I don't know how many pogroms you had in Ukraine, and who, as a student of history, in 1648, Bogdan Khmelnytsky led hordes of Ukrainians to Poland, violating women, assassinating tens of thousands of Jews. So we have and Babi Yar itself had a lot of cooperation of Ukrainians as well. Right now, this monument where over 30,000 people were put into a single grave. Now, on the other hand, we see that Israel somehow is becoming a broker in that as well. You know, it's Mashiach's Zeit. You know, we are living in Messianic times. Suddenly, Israel has a role in the world scene, in the conflict that is right now, the one that is terrifying the entire world. Do you think it's right for Israel to be a broker in that? Are they not going to get burned somehow? It's very difficult with Russia and Ukraine. We are between two fires.
Indeed, you know, the imperative to stand up for a country, for a democracy that is being invaded in an unprovoked manner, I think burns for all humanity, for all democracies. And at the same time, given the unexpected, maybe unpredictable nature of Putin and the fact that he controls the airspace also over Syria, where we do need to operate militarily quite regularly against Iran and its proxies, puts us in a very, very precarious situation. How much can you stand up for Ukraine? How much can you protest Russian actions? And it is a pleasant surprise, I would say, to see Prime Minister Bennett and the government offering and succeeding so far, at least, to play this mediating role. It's new from my perspective, and I think it comes down to that we have managed to develop a working relationship and some level of trust and communication with Putin and with Moscow that most countries in the West, frankly, do not have. And we've managed to stay out of that fray. And I'm glad to see our leadership here recognizing our unique position in being at once a country that is a Western democracy, but at the same time having this unique relationship with Moscow and being able to put it to what I hope will be good use.
I hope that we Jews throughout the world appreciate what Israel is today. Here it is, a broker in what is right now the most important issue throughout the entire world. On the other hand, I feel with you also that the issue of the Palestinians and Israel has to be solved one way, or must be solved. I don't want to say one way, I almost said one way or another. No, it must be solved, of course, taking into consideration the security needs of Israel. But I think that Israel is now in a much better position to negotiate with the Palestinians. And maybe if there would be a change of leadership among the Palestinians, someone who is not anchored in the past and cannot somehow try something new, maybe you need young people, like yourself, your age, because we met a few weeks ago in Miami. You came with somebody from the United Emirates and somebody from Bahrain, and it was so emotional to see the three of you together, and how, even though you have differences, of course, you are Jewish, they are Muslims, you have differences, no question about it, but on the other hand, you have many things in common. You want peace, you want a better life for your children and so on. So maybe, we should look forward to a change in the leadership of the Palestinians so that something, what do you think about that?
It seems to be necessary. I think for too long, people have been trapped in old paradigms, caught up on what they perceive to be the injustices of the past. And there are some things that cannot be resolved if you hang on to them, and you need a completely new paradigm, just like what the Abraham Accords offered. And so I think you need to extend this concept here. I certainly, I've been researching, writing, and speaking about the Middle East for my entire adult life. I don't know what the solution is with the Palestinian issue. We as an organization certainly don't take any position on what that should be. We certainly hope that what we are doing in our small part is building up a warmer atmosphere so that perhaps it's a new generation, perhaps it's the same generation, but so that the people, the public, feels more open, more willing to look at the other as humans who have also suffered and who have feel they've been wronged. And until we can decide the best way to solve this approach is to come, sit, speak, and look for a way forward without getting hung up on the past, it's hard to see a way forward. So maybe you need a new generation for that, or maybe a new generation that pushes the leadership to try a new way. And we just hope that what we're doing, our small part, can play a positive role.
Let me go to something altogether different, which is the following. Israel is advancing tremendously, no question about it, in all fields. Scientific, in Torah study, tremendous what's going on in Israel. Progress, scientific, technological, startup nation, everything is great. On the other hand, we see that the diaspora, the Jews that live in different countries, are not going through their best moment right now. What we thought that anti-Semitism maybe is going to eventually disappear, we realize that it's a very light sleeper. Suddenly it reawakens, and in Europe, even in the United States, you see that. So maybe we need some kind of Abraham Accord, between Israel and the diaspora. We have to strengthen these ties, somehow make sure that we converse a little bit more. Israel has to be occupied with itself. I understand that. Must grow. It must relate to its neighbors. But I think maybe a little more effort should be made into the ties of Israel with the diaspora. This birthright program that brought a lot of young people to Israel was tremendous. Maybe you have to think of other programs in addition to bring closer Israel and the diaspora.
100%. And I'll direct your listeners or your viewers to an article that I wrote about a month ago, published in the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune, pointing out that from our experience in going on speaking delegations, by the way, in another capacity, another hat I wear, I research the Jewish world with a think tank called the Jewish People Policy Institute. And I put my two hats, my two positions together to write this piece that looked at the trends of why an increasing number of young American Jews are distancing themselves from Israel. And when we take Shiraka speaking tours around the US, we are met with such a warm reception and applause for what we're doing. And the conclusion that I come to is that we're offering a message of hope. For too long, there has been no hopeful message around Israel and the story of conflict. Israelis said we are trapped in this conflict and we just have to keep battling it out until leadership changes. And the diaspora said Israel has to try to end the conflict and do whatever it can to end the conflict as the stronger party. And that doesn't leave a whole lot of room for either side to realize the complexities of where we are, and just leads to a lot of judgment. They don't understand us. They don't understand us. Now that there is a new narrative based around hope in the region, we can maybe once again have this positive vision, positive momentum that's bringing us together, and inspire us to sit down together, not just, as I called it in the article, not just between the children of Isaac and Ishmael, the Arabs and the Jews, but also between now perhaps the children of Isaac himself, between the Jews and the Jews. Between the different tribes of Yaakov. And I'm hoping that this new focus on a positive region on being able to work together through dialogue, through cooperation, through business. All these wonderful things can lead not just to a better Middle East, but a new approach and a new positive engagement between Israel and our very important brothers and sisters in the diaspora, because the gap that has opened up in recent years is only going to be harmful for both communities.
You know, I somehow, when I read history, you know, you usually read about great disasters, about wars and so on, and big events that happen, and that's it. Those are the center of attention when you read history. But I also think that many a time we are also confused by small things. You know, there was a pandemic that is still around, but many think maybe it's on its way out. Hopefully it should be so. You know, in the United States, there was a problem of masks, millions of problems, lack of distribution, not whatever, millions of mistakes they claim. I'm exaggerating by millions, but mistakes that were made in fighting this pandemic. But on the other hand, when you look at pandemics in the past, how many millions of people died compared to the world population at that time? Today, it's a very small percentage compared to that. So we should also look at history. I think, you know, it's really going in a certain curve going up. What is life expectancy today? What was life expectancy 100 years ago? And I think when we look at Israel also, we see this. There are problems, daily problems, and I'm sure you can tell us more than anybody else, or as well as any other Israeli, what's going on. But you see also a line that is going up, I think, for the world itself also. We're right now in a war with Ukraine. Okay, I hope that will pass soon. But we see a tremendous line of progress. I certainly hope that we Jews that still live outside of Israel will be able to get closer to Israel and take advantage of these numerous advances that Israel is doing in every aspect. Listen, I want to congratulate you because I think that the future is Abraham Accords, not only Abraham Accords, accords in general between countries, between peoples. Why are we fighting each other? You know, we have to face together. You know, there's a meteorite, I understand, that a couple of days ago hit the earth. It was a small thing. It happened there around near Greenland, Iceland, I don't know where. But there are events that affect us all. We all live in the same spaceship that is called the earth. We have to take care of the earth, of the natural resources. And I think that if we underline the word accord, we certainly will go forward. Give us a message of hope. Finally,
I wouldn't be in this job if I wasn't hopeful. You talked about the trajectory of history. Generally, we are in a better place now, even with the pandemic and even with the war in the Ukraine. We are in a better place in history than we've ever been as humankind. We shouldn't take it for granted. Things can also go backwards. We can go up and we can go down. We should realize that we do have an opportunity here, a positive opportunity to unite more and more people around the region and around the world against a common cause. We should see where there is injustice being done, just like in the Ukraine right now with Russia's aggression, and come together as a world. And COVID, even as bad as it was, also brought together the world in a lot of positive ways. And so every challenge is essentially also an opportunity to come together, to look at problems, that existed, and to see how we can act better as individuals, as families, as societies, as countries, as multi-country organizations. We're at an incredible time in history. Who would have thought in our lifetime to see this growing sense of peace and common cause in the Middle East, to the point where we can maybe even say today, even if it's for a short time, the Middle East is not the most violent place in the world right now. Who would have thought we could say that ever? Certainly for all of my life, the Middle East has always been synonymous with violence, chaos, and extremism. And now we're talking about a Middle East in which maybe half of it is actually just reached peace accords and normal, and not just peace accords, warm peace accords with each other. I think that's a phenomenal development. It is imperative upon us, all of us, to utilize this moment and do what we can to continue supporting it. And that's what we're trying to do in Sharaka. We're certainly not the only ones who care about this, and we welcome everyone to support this new peace, this new ray of hope in what's been a tough few years for the world, and join this cause and help build on this positive momentum.
Dan Feferman, speaking to you, I am convinced that it's people like you, your friends, those that have the same vision, that will certainly propel new horizons for not only for Israel, for the Jewish people, but I think for humanity at large, because it's a tremendous example that you're setting with the Abraham Accords. Thank you very much for the opportunity of speaking to you. God bless you and give you strength for many, many more years to contribute positively to a better understanding between all the peoples in the world. Thank you very much. Shalom, Sharaka. We are partners, partnership, Sharaka.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Rabbi Brener. Thank you for hosting me here. And I extend all the same blessings to you for a long and healthy career doing what you do, and a long and healthy life to you and your family. And it's so nice to be here. Thank you.
Shalom. Thank you very much.
Salam. Take care.